Hi guys, it's Kelly Latavola here, and I am back with another installment of What Would Kelly Make? And today's set that I chose to work with is called Mug Hugs by Sunny Studios, and so I'm going to be using both the stamps and the dies. And the reason that I picked this one is because A, I love coffee, could not survive without it, and B, I love plain blank mugs that let me add my own doodling. If you watched the technique video, you have already kind of seen what we're going to approach here, and you've already heard me say that I love things that can be your own. So since I'm doing a landscape card and I'm stamping all three of these stamps next to each other, I kind of want to find my center point so everything looks evenly spaced. I'm using a T-square ruler, but I'm also using my Simon grid mat, and it makes it just super easy to find the center because I just count up the squares, and then once I have even squares on both sides, I know I'm in the middle. So I went ahead and just kind of marked that with a pencil, and then I'm going to start my stamping. I'm using Intense Black ink by Simon Says Stamp because it's Copic safe, and I am going to be doing lots of Copic coloring. So I'm going to stamp the one in the center first. If you don't want to take the time to use the ruler and mark everything out, I recommend stamping the ones on the ends first because then you can center the one in the middle better. So once I had that stamped down, I decided I was going to mark myself a little line of where their bottom edges should be so they were even. Turns out it didn't matter that I did that because I still couldn't make it even. Still couldn't line it up, and you'll see as soon as I stamp it and then look at it. Yeah, man, missed it. But that's okay, it still ended up all right. So I really just love these adorable, I just love the mugs. I think that they're so cute. One has little marshmallows, one has the little whipped cream. Just so super cute. We're going to work on the background first. And to do that, we're going to do some distress inking. These, I just picked two colors. I felt like, it was a wintertime card. I really wanted to use the sentiment. What does it say? You are my heart. What does it say? I can't even remember. Like, I'm so not good at this. You are my heart, I think is what I ended up doing. You are my heart. Oh, that makes so much more sense, ladies and gents. Okay. So anyway, when I was doing the distress ink, I was making sure that I was starting on one of the mugs because I knew it was going to be covered. Distress inks is made to emboss with. So before we do the embossing, I'm going to show you, if you don't heat set it, this is going to happen. So make sure that you heat set it and that your ink is completely dry before you go in there and try to heat emboss anything. I have made this mistake on several occasions. On the rare occurrence that you feel like as long as you haven't heat set it, like you haven't ruined it. You can just wipe off the embossing powder and then dry it down and it'll be fine. So now I dried it, I'm going to make sure I'm going to test it and everything's good. We're not sticking to it. I'm using an embossing buddy to make sure that I didn't leave sticky little fingerprints all over it. And then I'm going to go ahead and start stamping my snowflakes in Versamark ink. I know a lot of people will do all of their stamping at one time and then heat emboss it. That usually doesn't work out for me. I need to see it. I need to visually see where those things are in order to make good decisions about the rest of where they're going. So I heat set them in between each snowflake. So this is the largest snowflake I'm using. Then I added a smaller one. Then they have these little circles, which I think are supposed to be sprinkles, but I thought that they would make a cute little background. So they have a cluster of 3, and then they also have a single one. And I used both of them to just kind of build up my background. Once I was happy with the stamping portion of it, just to fill in any small areas, I went in with my white gel pen and just added little dots to bring it all in. One more thing before we move on from the background. The reason I set up the mugs the way that I did was because the ones on the ends, their handles face out. So it draws your eye to the center, which is where our sentiment's going to be. I'm using Stardust Stickles to just add little pops of glitter into the background, and then I'm going to set it aside to dry. Before Winkastella came out, Stardust Stickles went on every single one of my cards. They were it for me. They were everything, Stardust Stickles. So I'm adding just a little bit, this cute little heart. We're going to be talking about doodling, but if for some reason you aren't comfortable with that, don't discount those tiny little stamps that come in each stamp set, because with some well-placed Post-its, you can use those as well. So for this one, we're going to be doing the stripes. You want to make sure your line is curved with the shape of the mug, because a straight line wouldn't make sense. Then we're going to do some large polka dots. When you're doing polka dots, like, your circles don't have to be perfect, folks. My circles aren't perfect. I'm not an illustrator. This is hand drawn. But just make sure you're doing a couple that aren't full circles to give it that look of the three-dimensional look. Here, this is probably the most difficult doodling that I would be doing, and this is just kind of like a half flower. The reason I do the half flower is because I can't make my flowers symmetrical. Even when I'm, just zentangling while I'm on the phone, I can't make it happen. So this is something that I can do to be able to incorporate that softer, more feminine or delicate look without having to really tax myself and stress out about how my drawings look. So just by doing the little half flower. We're going to go right into the coloring. I chose a pretty monochromatic color scheme. I stuck with blues, blue violets, and purples. And then, it's not something I normally do, but I was actually really happy with the way that it came out. When you're doing the handle, I talk a lot about when you're coloring, following the shape of an object. It's really important. Your coloring strokes, that's what is going to draw the eye. And so if they aren't in harmony with the way that the shape of the object is, it's going to be very noticeable. So when you're coloring mug handles, make sure you're turning the paper however you need to be comfortable, but to get that round edge with your flicking motion. Because if you try to do straight lines there, it's going to look awkward. And we've all been, the awkward person at a party. It's not fun. We don't want our mugs to be awkward. I'm going from my lightest to my darkest back out to my lightest, and then it's up to you really what kind of highlight you want to do. I went with a straight center highlight because this card is those three mugs together. It's not a scene. The center highlight is much easier for coloring. One of the biggest challenges I had while doing this card was keeping my blues straight. The B26 lid is darker than the B28 lid, and so I kept grabbing it and using it in the wrong area. So you'll see me having to do it twice, and that's just my own fault. So I'm on to the lightest color, and here I'm just going to show you that you can leave some white if you really want a strong highlight. I preferred something a little more subdued. I knew how busy my background was. So I just went ahead and filled it all in. And then for the other stripes, I'm going to do white. When you're coloring anything white, you're just adding in the shadows. So since this is a round object, you're going to have shadows that are going to come from the sides. This particular doodling, adding these striped lines in the way that I've colored them, is a more masculine style of coloring. And I'm totally okay with that. I think that I think it makes things more interesting when you mix the masculine with the feminine. And so this flower over here is obviously the very feminine part of the card. I decided to do that in some bright violets, kind of bring out that wilted violet from the background. And I'm coloring this just like I would any other flower. The darkest points are going to be where the petals meet in the center, and where anything is laying on top of the other. I am using a very light hand because this particular doodle or design is not very large. So I want to make sure that I still keep those highlights on those outer petals. If I could enunciate, that would be helpful. You want to make sure you keep those highlights on the outer petals because it's really going to separate them from each other so you don't just have like a blobby flower. Once I have the lightest color down, I'm going to move on to the other flower, and then we're just going to color in the center with just it's more like a golden, or it's a YR, so it's an orange. Here I'm going to make the mug white, but you'll see I'm coloring right over the purple. Be careful about this with your light grays, because if it's a red, you could drag it into the mug. Not gonna lie, it's a risk. But the flowers are not in front of the mug. The flowers are on the mug. So they're going to have the same shaded edges that the rest of the mug has because it's one unit. So when you're doing it, adding in those shadows is going to help make it appear more realistic. So I'm just using the same gray colors that we have been using for our whites, and I'm, blending them out, going right over the purples, and then, you'll see that it really does start to look like just one mug, not like the designs are separate. I went ahead and colored in the heart purple using those same violets. And I left the highlight in the center, just like I've been doing with everything else. We want everything to be cohesive and make sense together. Here we're doing the blue violet. This is the most difficult mug to color, and it's why I saved it for last. The reason that it's the most difficult mug to color is because I am trying to make those polka dots a different color, which means I have to color around each individual object. This is kind of difficult to do, especially when there's a lot of them, but there is no wrong way to do it. It is all guesswork, folks. I know that a lot of people don't like to hear that because they want very specific instructions how to do things, but there is no way to guesstimate how far out you should be going. Just try to leave the same amount of highlight in the center for each section and you'll be doing all right. As long as there's something there, for that highlight, it's not really going to matter how far out you come. It's going to be okay. It's just difficult. It makes the blending just a little bit more difficult because you can't use a smooth stroke. Everything's a little bit more choppy, but it is possible. You just have to be more aware of it. Another way that you could color this, if you don't want to have to color around the polka dots, is put the polka dots down, use a pale color in the background so you can color over everything, and then make your polka dots more bold. So then it's going to cover up anything in the background, and then you're like good to go. There's no reason to have to color around things. So once I filled that in, then I wanted to add in the blue. So I went ahead and just added in the blue to the, a hand protector, mug warmer? I don't know. You know what I'm saying. And then I'm going to go in and do the same thing with those whites. I want my polka dots to be white, and there's going to be a highlight in the center. So we're going to be coloring it almost exactly like we did the white mug on the right-hand side, because all of the shadows are still going to be the same. That lid is going to cast a shadow onto the cup. The mug holder is going to cast a shadow onto the bottom of the cup. So you don't want to skip those steps because we're trying to make this look realistic. And you'll see as we keep adding these grays, it's not hurting the blue violet any. It already has its own shading. It's not hurting it. But it really starts to look three-dimensional, like it has some depth and some body to it. I'm going to use the same grays for the lid. Here you want to use a really, really light hand. And I'm not going to lie, this is probably going to take some practice. It took me a long time to be able to do it. You should be barely touching the paper because you want those lines to be super thin. You're trying to conserve a highlight for each area, except for the area on the top. That will be the darkest. That little thin line will be the darkest area because it's going back. And anything that's darker automatically falls to the background. The last thing that we're going to do as far as coloring is color in the whipped cream and marshmallows. I didn't want to do them with the cool grays because I wanted there to be a distinction between each of the mugs and the whipped cream. So I opted to use a warm gray. Again, we're coloring this white, so we don't want to be super heavy-handed because we don't want dirty whipped cream and dirty marshmallows. I've probably eaten a dirty marshmallow while I was on a camping trip like 1 time or 5 times. I'm really not that picky, but all in all, it's not that appealing to other people, so we want to make sure that we don't leave them gray. Keep following the form of the object, the way that whipped cream swirls. You want to make sure your strokes are matching that. For the marshmallows, I only added the darkest color just to the back row, and I made sure to keep a lot of the white. Again, we don't want it to look dirty. We want it to look white with some shadows. And it's so interesting to me, like you can see such a difference in the warm grays and the cool grays, even though they're both gray. Like definitely both of those are worth getting. I outlined all of my images because that's what I always do, and I figured it would be easier to do that before I did my die cutting. And speaking of die cutting, this is now the second challenge of my card because I'm not very good at making sure I stay inside the lines because normally I'm doing a whole background, so I don't really have to care. I was deathly afraid of this white border that I thought they were going to leave, but they were actually like really easy to line up and they cut really easy. So once I have all of those lined up, I'm going to go ahead and run it through my Big Shot. So now I have some kind of bad news. At some point or another, my camera stopped working right after I stamped the sentiment. I want to tell you what I did with the rest of the card. So there's kind of just like a little bit in here, more of my process than you're used to seeing, just so I can tell you what happened. I wanted to stamp the sentiment flat. Then I knew it wasn't going to work because I had the embossing in the background, so I toyed around with the idea of doing it on a circle. The circle was too big, I didn't like it. So I decided I was going to go ahead and risk it and use the Misty because then I could stamp it multiple times. So I tried to stamp over the embossing. Ladies and gentlemen, it did not work. So let me warn you that if you would like your sentiment to be flat, stamp it before you emboss for real. So I went ahead and stamped it with the Misty. It didn't cover the embossing completely. I decided that I was going to fill it in with my marker, the Copic Safe marker. That did work. Then I outlined it with a white gel pen. I glued down my coffee mugs, and then I stamped the sentiment again. That's why I used the Misty. So it's not level, but it is legible. And then the only other thing that I did was add some clear link of Stella to the heart, the whipped cream, and the marshmallows. So I'm sorry that for some reason I didn't catch all of it. This is me kind of filling in the sentiment. I don't know what the deal was, but basically you got to see the whole card, and my apologies that it's not all there. So I hope that you guys try doodling on your next card. Please, by all means, if you do, let me know. I'd love to see it. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you guys next month. Bye.